Welcome back to ZOO3649 Evolutionary Genetics 2020. We're at lecture 9 in the middle of our big section on natural selection. And, we've been through the tenets of natural selection. We've been through how Darwin came to this idea, how observant he was. Yesterday we talked about how we measure natural selection through um, fitness. And today we're going to be talking about evidence for natural selection. So not only can we test this, we see evidence for it, clear evidence for natural selection everywhere we look. So what is some of the evidence for natural selection? There will probably be a question which asks you for evidence of natural selection, and you can use any of these examples, or you can use any example of your own. Okay, the oldest example of evidence for natural selection, and I'm going to give you many in this lecture, okay? But the oldest one, the one that everyone knows the best, not always the best one to use, but it's the oldest one. It's not the one I like using most, it's not the one I like seeing in answers the most, but to be honest, it is an example, and so you can use it if you want to. Is industrial melanism, okay? So industrial melanism, it's a hard one to get your tongue around. It comes because of this species called a peppered moth. The peppered moth exists in two colors, a black version and a white version. Okay? Just like humans, there are two, or actually in humans there are so many different colors, not just black and white. But you see, this one species can have two colors, right? So what do you see here? On this trunk, which is a natural trunk covered by lichen. Lichen are those things that grow on trees. You can see this black moth very easily. So if I was a predator, I will see this moth on this white background and I will go and eat it. Likewise, if you have a tree which is covered in soot, soot is what? That black stuff that comes after you light a fire. If you have a fire burning, you put a paper on top, but without the paper burning, what will happen? You hold it for a few seconds, you look at the paper, what will you see? You see black on that paper, no? That's called soot, okay? So if you're burning a lot of chemicals and so on in your factories, you're going to get a lot of soot in the air. It'll land on the trees, and the tree's bark will go black. In such a situation, the white moth suddenly can be seen, right? This black moth, if he was sitting there, he would be just fine. Here's the black moth there. If you can see it, there it is, right? This black moth is going to be fine. The white moth is in trouble because it can be seen. Okay? And how many of you can tell me where is the white moth on this picture here? You need good eyes to see it. Okay, so what happens? In normal times, the black variety was very rare. Why? Because normally the trees look like this, okay? And the black moth can be seen immediately and eaten. So the birds were eating the black moth. So there were not so many of them around. Whereas after what happened, the Industrial Revolution happened in the 1800s, and suddenly factories were everywhere, machines were everywhere. And what did this do? It burnt coal. And so what happened? There was soot everywhere in the environment, and all the tree trunks became brown. Suddenly, the white one, which was actually cruising on this side here, he's not cruising anymore. He's going to get eaten. Suddenly, the black one, which was not popular on this at this time, suddenly, when all the trees are becoming darker, this black one suddenly becomes more common. Why? Because the birds are not eating that anymore. The birds are eating these white ones because they can see the white one better. Okay? So that is your industrial melanism. Okay? So the white variety was easily seen by predators, and within a few generations, the black variety became more common. Okay? So, another classic example of evidence for natural selection are these amazing finches. This is the original evidence for natural selection, actually, because this is the very group that Darwin observed and came up with the idea of natural selection in the first place. So, if you look at this, as I said to you, all these different kinds of birds and their beaks are on different islands in the Galapagos. Each island has a different kind of bird. And one of these is the ancestor. Okay? One of these, okay, came from, sorry, all of these came from a common ancestor. Okay? And where is that common ancestor? You can take all these lines of descent. Here are the trees, the lines of descent showing you who's most related to whom. But you take it to the bottom where all the lines come together. And when all the lines come together, that is what? That is the root of the tree. That is the common ancestor for all those species. So where's the common ancestor? Where all these lines come together, it is where? It is right here. Okay? All the lines come together right there. This is the ancestor to all these birds here. These birds are all found on islands. Where is this one found? It's not on an island. This one comes from the mainland. No? This one comes from the mainland in South America. That means it made its way to each of these islands. And when it arrived on the environment in these different islands, what did it see? It saw that the islands have different environments. And the different environment exert different selection pressures on the local population. So on one island, a fat beak might be good because on that island there are many trees which have hard seeds, right? So you need a big fat beak like this one here, right? To smash those hard seeds. Great. But what happens if you have a beak like that on an island where there are only worms? Tiny little worms. Yeah? So when you have worms, you don't need a hard, fat beak like this. You can't even pick up the worm properly with that beak. You need a beak like this guy here, or these two guys. You see? A sharp beak. If you are feeding on fruits, maybe you don't want a fat beak like this. You also don't want a sharp beak. You want something maybe in between. Okay? If you are a woodpecker, you need a very hard beak to poke the wood. Then you will have a beak like this. So, depending on what the environment of that island, what trees it had, what weather it had, determined which of these different shapes of beak was going to be the fittest. You can see on the different islands, the same one is not always the fittest. Why? Because the environment of the islands are all different. Okay? And that is what led to what we call this adaptive radiation of many different phenotypes, all of them closely related to a common ancestor on the mainland. Okay? So you had these two, the Grants, Peter and Rosemary Grant, a married couple that went and studied Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands because they wanted to measure fitness. They wanted to finish Darwin's work. Because remember, Darwin went to those very islands. That is where he got the idea for natural selection. So why not go to those very islands as researchers in the modern day and measure fitness so that you can use the very same species that Darwin used to come up with natural selection. You can use them to measure natural selections, to measure fitness. Okay? And these guys, they had a brilliant study. It took 20 to 30 years long. Okay? They had a long-term study. Because if you want to measure evolution, you can't measure it from one day to the next unless you're dealing with something like a virus or COVID, which mutates in many generations very quickly. Birds don't do that. Birds take a while to reproduce. Humans take even longer to reproduce. Okay, that's why evolution doesn't happen as fast in humans as it does for a bacteria, which have the generation often. So they had a long-term study of 30 years or so, and because it was long-term, it had droughts and wet cycles. Okay, it had many drought cycles during that period. What the droughts did, it changed the kind of food that was available on the islands. Okay? On the islands, only the toughest seeds could remain and survive that drought. Okay? All the other seeds dried up and were gone. The only things that actually remained were seeds that were the hardest. So now that is a big collapse in food supply. Because if you don't have a beak to eat that hard seed, to break it, you're going to starve and you're going to die. You're not going to be struggling. You're not going to survive the struggle for existence. And remember, to have a high fitness, you have to survive that struggle. And not only, you have to also reproduce after that. So if there's a drought and suddenly your food is gone and only this very hard seed is remaining, then if you don't have a big beak, you're not going to make it. Okay? So look what happened. Here, look at the first graph. Here is 1975 to 1978. 1, 2, 3. Over the course of 4 years, there was a drought. This drought here. You see in blue, there's the drought there. Between 76 and 77. Before the drought, the black line shows you the size of the population. More than 1,000. 1,400. By the end of the drought, there were only 200 birds left. So that means most of them died, perished, didn't survive the struggle. The drought was too much for them. Right? What happened also here? The blue line shows you the size, the consumption, of seeds also dropped. Okay, so this is telling you that the population collapsed. So the food collapsed, the population collapsed, the food collapsed. Okay? So what does the next graph show us? The highest mortality, okay? This is an index of increasing size, where size is bigger and up here and smaller down there. Look what happens. Here's the drought again in blue. Before the drought, these are males, these are all, and these are females, right? It doesn't matter which line we look at. Before, there were few that were this size here. All of them were this size here. Below 0.6, the males. What happened after the drought? After the drought, suddenly the size of the males becomes bigger. Look how big the males have become. Even the females have gone from here to here in size. They've gone from here to here in size. So both males and females got bigger after the drought. Why? Why? This is telling you that there was a very strong selection for large birds that can crack the tough seeds that are remaining. These tough seeds are remaining here. This small population remaining. Only the ones with the biggest beaks are the ones that are surviving here and eating those hard seeds. All the ones here with small beaks died out because the seeds, the smaller seeds and the nicer seeds also died out. Okay? So that's why the size of the birds became bigger after the drought, because only ones who were left after the drought were the big guys who were able to crack the big seeds. So here the grants, Rosemary and Peter, are able to show natural selection. The drought is causing the selection. They're able to show that natural selection causes a change that in phenotype, in fitness, that can be measured. This is not just theories, guys. Within a couple of generations, a year, the power of natural selection changed this population from having mainly small individuals to now having big individuals. The population evolved. The population became bigger. Okay, that's the power of natural selection. Another beautiful example is drug resistance. Many medical doctors, you see, they don't quite understand evolution. Evolution is not normally on any on any medical syllabus, unfortunately, because I'm not sure what medics are doing if they don't understand about evolution, because it's one of the most important things to understand as a medic. Why? Because viruses also evolve. Bacteria also evolve. The viruses and the bacteria, they are pathogens. They are the ones that kill us. So if they are evolving, we need to know, how are they evolving? What is their mutation rate? What environment can we give them where their fitness goes lower and allows us to survive? Remember, if the fitness of the virus goes down, our fitness goes up. So how can we increase our survival? We need to understand fitness and natural selection in our pathogens. If we don't understand that, we don't know what we're doing in medicine. Okay? Which is why a lot of doctors, unfortunately, don't know what they're doing. Okay? So, they prescribe antibiotics for minor illness. How many times have you been to a clinic where you've got a cough or something and doctor gives you antibiotics? That's nonsense. Why do you give antibiotics for a viral infection when you know antibiotics are not going to work? Putting antibiotics into our system. When we are eating chickens, do you know how many antibiotics they pump into they inject into that chicken while it's growing up so that it doesn't have a disease and die while it is growing up? Then we are eating those chickens. And we're eating what? We're eating all those antibiotics. What does that mean for us and the evolution of diseases in our populations? Look what that has done. Because we have put antibiotics everywhere, so many bacteria have become resistant. How do you explain? This can be a test question. Explain multi-drug resistant pathogens, the emergence of multi-drug resistant pathogens in light of natural selection. How are you going to do that? We have drug resistant pathogens because of evolution. Okay? So if you don't get evolution, you don't want to get it, you're never going to understand biology. And you can't even understand how diseases are operating because they also evolve. Wake up. It's time to learn about evolution. So how does this happen? How do bacteria become resistant to antibiotics? It's because of natural selection. Imagine, you know, in the example where there's a bird and it's eating only brown beetles and or eating only green beetles and not eating brown. Well, that is what the antibiotics are doing. The antibiotics are there to kill all kinds of pathogens, bacteria. They are there to kill it. But if you always give them that environment, which is going to give them hard selection, eventually you will get one mutation. Because every time there's replication, there's a chance to have a mutation. You will get one mutation. And then what will happen? That mutation will give that bacteria an advantage, a fitness advantage. It will allow it to grow despite that antibiotic. It gives it an antibiotic resistance. That could be, for example, it could obtain a plasmid, right? You know this. You've done this. You know about gene cloning in 2544. When we clone, we have to have an antibiotic resistance gene in there. And so we grow the cloned bacteria on the plate with the antibiotic, so we know it's been transformed. So the same thing we do here. Okay? When we give the drug, when TB obtains a plasmid which has a resistance gene, then it is resistant to that antibiotic. And if you give antibiotics all the time, you will find more and more things becoming resistant. This is how evolution works. You have hard selection using the drug, and then you will have survival of the fittest. Okay? There are many Neisseria, meningitis, Neisseria gonorrhea, Streptococcus aureus, E. coli. There are many bacterial diseases which we have had in the past under control. But because medical doctors do not understand evolution, therefore the last 30-40 years been pumping us with antibiotics, and suddenly all these bacteria which we could control are becoming uncontrollable, thanks to Mr. Darwin's idea. Okay, if you want to have proof of Mr. Darwin's idea, look no further than HIV. This is one of the biggest problems we have on our continent, right? So every time we give HIV a new drug, what are we doing? We are changing the environment, right? We are creating a selection pressure, right? Normally, the nature is doing it, natural selection, but we are doing it now. We are creating the selection by giving it a hard drug. Now, what happens when HIV comes into contact with this drug? What happens? Here's a picture, right? Here's an individual which has HIV. Inside, you see it has red copies of HIV and blue copies of HIV. Okay? You give this one drug A. Now, the virus, what happens? You've changed the environment in this body. You've changed the environment. Here's the environment without the drug. Here's the environment with the drug. So you've now changed the environment here the way those birds are doing the selection when they eat only the green beetle and not the brown beetle. The way the drought was doing the selection by favoring the big birds with the big beak to crack those hard nuts that are remaining after the drought. Same thing, but in this time, the drug is creating the environment. The drug creates an environment, and now the drug which is killing the virus, that virus has to evolve to that drug. Those viruses that are not resistant to the drug will be killed. Okay, so these red ones, they will be killed. However, within a population, you have variation. Okay, slight variations, and that's what natural selection needs, right? Without variation, you cannot have natural selection. So now natural selection says, oh, there's variation. Some of them are going to be fitter than others. The fittest ones are the ones in blue. Those are the ones that have a resistance to the drug. What will happen? You've changed the environment from different kinds of HIV. You have only one kind. Unfortunately, it's the one that is resistant. So it's still there, even though you've given a drug. It's now got a resistance. Now what happens? This drug is now, you can take any drug and this one doesn't go away. Why? Why? Because the drug you're giving, it has a resistance. It has evolved a resistance through natural selection. Okay? The way to treat that is to stop taking this drug. Okay? Stop taking it. What happens? Because the blue one is highly specialized to the drug, it has to give up some advantage. Now, when you take the drug away, the red one, which doesn't like that drug, but when you take the drug away, you find the red one takes over from the blue one, because the red one is the one that is not specialized. It has the one, under normal circumstances, it's even more efficient than the blue one. So you stop taking the drug A, okay? And what happens? That blue one that is HIV resistant gets less and less and less, and you allow the virus inside the patient to compete with each other. Eventually, the virus that is not resistant to the drug becomes more common again. You wait, and then you give a very strong dose of that to bring the viral load completely almost to zero. Okay? And that is what these antiretroviral drugs are doing. Okay? So, and that the text here is what I've just explained to you. And the bottom line is what? HIV and any other disease caused by a pathogen can only be controlled if we understand its evolution. Ladies and gentlemen, this world is not going to forgive you if you don't understand evolution. And Moodley's job is to make sure you get it into your heads so that when you are finished with this bachelor's degree, you are able to have a proper conversation about someone outside about the meaning of life. Okay? So, evolution should be a standard part of all the medical curriculum. But at the moment, it is not. Most people who do medicine don't know how to even spell evolution. Okay, that brings us to our lecture on evidence for natural selection. Next lecture will be evidence for artificial selection. It'll be a small lecture, and this lecture will be directly linked to practical one. Okay, so you should watch practical one after you've had this you've watched this lecture. Okay, remember practical one is a video, right? You have to watch a YouTube video. You have to answer the questions in your practical guide. All right, so that will be next lecture on artificial selection. All right, I'll end it there.